morning, MedTech Insights followers. We are excited to be here for day 2 of the Convergence Forum, where we are live and talking about the latest in biotech, life sciences, and digital health. I am Dr. Jennifer Joe, and as you can see, we're all sitting together this time and excited to be out and about. Everyone knows Dr. Ami Bhatt.
Nice to see you.
And today we have
Carla McDonald.
Carla McDonald. We are talking about some fun things. So I will let Dr. Black take it away while I double check the feed.
Great, thank you. So a fantastic day at the Convergence Forum out here on a beautiful Cape Cod, Massachusetts in Wequassett Resort. Thank you to them for hosting us again this year. Yesterday we spoke with Scott Kirshner. Hopefully later today we'll have Shane Gilbert, who are the founders of this event. And I think they said 19 years. Is that what they said?
think 19, 20
I feel
years.
like 19 or 20 years now. So we're going to call next year 20 so we can make it an even bigger celebration, because otherwise we would have missed that opportunity. But really great conversations yesterday, thinking about what the future of biotech looks like, how things have changed over the past decade, how COVID has or hasn't changed what we're doing in medicine and healthcare delivery. So a lot of really good conversations. I'm doing a lot of talking to make sure that Jen can double check that tech, but I'm going to assume things are A-okay so we can let Carla start talking. So Carla, maybe just for our audience, because we nabbed Carla this morning and we were like, you are a high-powered woman in biotech, and our audience needs to get to know you. Poor thing's the first one awake and on the hot seat this morning. But one of the most interesting things to us is everybody's story is unique in how they get to where they are. And those are the stories that we actually sometimes don't get to see when you see a title and a name. So Carla, I will start with just asking you, before you even talk about the company, how did you get to being here? How are you here, and a powerful woman in biotech sitting at the table? Just a little bit about where you started from.
Perfect. And for the record, I think I was chosen not because of my role, but because it was 7:30 and I was awake and in the hall, but happy to talk. So I grew up in a family where my father worked in the healthcare industry. And so at the dinner table every night, and this was the time when families still sat at the dinner table every night, he would talk about what was happening in the company that day, what they were discovering in the labs. The feeling of being able to learn about science every day. And so as a kid, I wasn't necessarily drawn to the STEMs naturally, or even knew what I wanted to do. I don't know if any kids really, I don't even know if grownups know what we want to do yet.
You got it.
But it was just always a really compelling dinner conversation. And my dad always sort of had that twinkle in his eye when he talked about work. And I think that's really special if you can go to the office every day and feel like you're moving the needle on something.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. You know, it makes me want to actually make sure to make those dinners happen
Oh,
and
yeah.
talk about that and have them see what we enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And so from that, you started a career in science?
No, actually, I am a non-scientist.
Okay.
Warning. I actually went to university, and you will get my out and about. I'm from Canada. So I grew up in Montreal and I went to McGill. And I followed more of a business communications background.
Okay.
And just sort of stumbled a little bit into my first biotech job. Sort of knew someone who knew someone, and voila, I ended up in the industry. And my first job was for a very small startup, and it was fantastic because when you join a small company, you don't sort of get stuck in a box. You really get to work cross-functionally. Across the organization, you really get to see how it runs.
Yeah.
And so I worked in small companies for a little while, and then I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see sort of the other side, the flip side? So from a sort of a development, early stage research company going to a much larger organization, and then I went to Merck, which is a 70,000 multinational big company. And I spent about 12 years inside of Merck, and I saw the power of what a large company could do.
Yeah.
And there's so many amazing advances, whether it's early vaccines or obviously we talk about the immunotherapies now in Keytruda, that really came out of this large organization that was really super passionate about science.
Yeah.
And it was all about really asking those hard questions and pursuing those therapies that were really going to have a tangible difference.
I love that.
It was inspiring.
Yeah. And the course, I think, is an important one because having the small startup and having that kind of cross-functional exposure, we talk about this a lot as we're thinking about MedTech, biotech, even digital health, is if you only know what you know, we're just not able to progress at the kind of pace that's actually possible today. Versus if you know what you know really well, and then you have a sense of what everybody else is doing and how it may fit into that puzzle piece. And I think that's incredibly important. We've also had many guests this time and many people at the conference who've spent some time in a larger company understanding both what the capabilities are, how things can move, and sometimes what the regulations are and what it feels like to have to get through multiple levels of things. We had an interesting conversation yesterday about hub and spoke, right? This was so we talked about, a lot of us talk about the hub and spoke, how great it is, like I'm the hub and I have all these spokes, and how a few people said, but that's not really right, because you're more like a little filter or a ceiling. Everything's going through you, and therefore we're only moving at the pace that you can move, even if that person is a phenomenal CEO. And so I think that was, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that, but maybe first, will you start by telling us a little bit about Entrada?
Perfect.
And then we can talk a little bit about filters and how you keep things agile at the company.
Absolutely. So I work for a company called Entrada Therapeutics. We're based in the Boston Seaport. And we went public in the fall, and we've been around for about 4 years. And it's a really interesting technology that came out of the Ohio State University and was venture funded early on. And basically, we're trying to solve a very old problem in medicine. We know that 75% of all disease-causing targets are located in the cell, but most therapeutics can't or have a really hard time getting into the cell. And so we've developed a technology, a platform, and it's a cyclic peptide, and we call it an endosomal escape vehicle because it can get out of the endosome and successfully. It's cool. It's cool. Maybe we need to get T-shirts. Actually, we probably do have T-shirts. You will learn that swag is very important in biotech.
Yes, we're gathering that.
And so our first indications are in neuromuscular disease. We're looking at Duchenne muscular dystrophy as one of our first indications. And I know most people who go to medical school go into medical, as I'm sure you both have, because you have this higher calling to do something. And I think there's a lot of people who have negative opinions of pharma in the industry, and there's been some things in the past that haven't worked out so well, and it's fully acknowledged. But most of us who go into biotech and pharma are following that same calling, right? We're patients ourselves. I have a child who has a chronic condition, and so we're all inspired to come to this industry to see if we can advance new therapies for patients and caregivers and our family members. Because if you have a family member who's sick, it's a whole family affair, and it's everybody pulling together. And so we have that calling too. And so for me, what attracted me to Entrada was a few things. One, it's sort of the rigor of the science. I love being amongst scientists, and I love being amongst scientists who really ask those hard questions. And so that was the first thing that first attracted me too, is just sort of the fundamental challenge and the problem that the technology was hopefully will be solving. But the other thing is, having worked in large companies before, and even the great ones, there's always so much to fix, right? Because they have long traditions, they started in a different era. And this is an opportunity to build a company from the ground up. So you're not fixing things that happen under sort of somebody else's watch, if you will. You get to build a company the way you want to build it. And one of the things I love about Entrada, 50% of our employees identify as women. 50% of our employees are not white. And so we're sort of living our values. This is not wouldn't this be great if we hired some women? We've actually done it, and we're cultivating and nurturing that sort of inclusive environment. And of course, we've all seen the data. We know that inclusive environments are more innovative. Innovative companies are what we need to develop future therapies. So that's why I came, and I love it. And it's sort of like, over promise, under deliver sometimes happens. Not here. It's under promise, over deliver. It's been just an amazing experience so far.
Oh, this is fantastic. I think, for all the people out there who are watching and thinking about, what does it feel like to go to a startup? What does it feel like to be an entrepreneur? Can you do it as a woman? We have this conversation on the show quite a bit, that the idea of women in positions like yours lifting up other women is so incredibly important, but you don't have to wait till you're a CEO to do that, right? And you start building early, and you build a culture where that happens, which is excellent.
Yeah, and I think it's everybody's responsibility. And we were talking about yesterday, is if you're a physician seeing patients, how can you sort of go into every discussion understanding where you might have some biases? And we all have them. We wish we didn't, but we do. If you're a junior person in the company, how do you start your day and say, how do I draft my emails that are better? How do I advocate for something in the program that I'm working for. And so I think one of the areas where that's super passionate for me is inclusion in clinical trials. We know that there's significant health inequities in the United States, and we know what they're based on. We actually have the research and the data now to sort of better understand it. So how are we as companies looking differently at the way we not just build our corporate environment to make sure that we have diverse people who are asking questions about diversity, but how are we looking at our trials and make sure we're trying new things? So not just going to the same old trial centers. It might be easier to do that, but we're probably not getting access to all the patient populations we need. How are we powering our trials? Are we making sure that people who perhaps are economically disadvantaged have an opportunity to get to clinical trial sites? What about regional diversity? What about the lack of trust that exists within certain populations relative to the industry? And so if you have diverse people in the companies building the plans, then you're asking these questions from day one. And it goes back to you're not, fixing something a few months from now or a few years from now, because hopefully you fixed it right or you built it right from the start.
Or you fix your own mistake and you learn from it and then you move on, which will also happen, right? And that's and that's okay. We were talking yesterday quite a bit as a large group, just for our audience, also about decentralized clinical trials and how innovation has really allowed us to be able to get out into the communities where people live. And a lot of the things you touch on when we think about regionality and making sure we're including people, when we think about those who may not be able to make it to a numerous set of clinic visits or, get bloods drawn in a major city, but need to do that locally. How do we set up that network? And it's going to be different. It's not going to be the same the world over. It's not going to be the same across the US. But if we get it right in each region and if each company does their part in figuring out what is their system going to be, I think it does make a really big difference. Dr. Joe, thoughts from you or questions from the audience?
Yeah, so I'm very excited about that. Sorry, and I am popping in and out because I'm managing the tech today too. I'm always managing the tech, but it's a little bit more tricky when we have limited bandwidth on beautiful Cape Cod.
It's foggy today. It's foggy.
So I love this discussion. I'm very passionate about it. It's really important as we move into the concept of precision medicine or making sure whatever we're developing is actually appropriate and targeted for the patient population that we're delivering it to. I want to just expand on this conversation that I feel like is so important, which is the concept of how do we have more diversity in clinical trials, but how did we actually learn about the inequity? It's like we talked about that during COVID. And we didn't have the data before. Now we have a lot more data. From your perspective, I would love to hear more about that because it's so important.
Yeah. So some different ways. So I'll use one example. Earlier in my career, I worked for Merck, as I shared, and Merck launched. So Merck has had a tradition of really sort of public health from the beginning. It's a 100-plus-year-old company. And the leadership team was looking for a new sort of initiative. And you think, oh, here goes a company with an initiative, woohoo, right?
Yeah.
But what they did is they decided, there's an issue around maternal health.
Oh.
And so Merck invested $500 million.
That's incredible.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maternal health is so important. We are atrocious in this country. At
So
maternal health.
over 10 years, and this was 12 years ago. So I'm not going to say Merck started the conversation, but the power of Merck's investment enabled this conversation to take off. And again, it's many things. Neither, here you go. You're both interested in maternal health and didn't know of that sort of industry connection. And Merck is a very sort of methodical, data-driven company. And so the first thing they did is they wanted to understand, who is dying and how are they dying, and the data wasn't there. And there were different things, like, for example, charts in hospitals didn't necessarily sort of have a maternal health like checklist, so that if you're a physician and someone dies, what do you check? And that sounds like a really stupid thing on one level, but that's what drives the data on the other.
And it's silly that we didn't have that in place also.
Yep. We have versions of that now. We're getting better.
You're getting there. But it was one of these situations where we didn't have the data. So we didn't know who was dying. We didn't know how many women were dying.
Oh, wow.
And there were certain hospital systems around the country who had different mechanisms of tracking this, but there was not a unified sort of answer. So when you're trying to study something, it became really difficult. And it's hard to solve for something you don't understand.
If you don't have the data and you don't understand what it is.
Exactly. And so again, they were part of a movement that spurred this conversation around maternal health. And I would say you'd be hard pressed to find a woman in this country. Well, a woman in this country, at least in some areas, who hasn't heard of this topic now.
Yeah.
We know that women of color, Black women in particular, are disproportionately impacted. So we've seen studies that say if you're so Carla, white woman, I'm just going to pretend I went to NYU, I make $250,000 a year, and I live in wherever. And if I'm now a Black woman with all these same criteria, I'm still significantly more likely.
Yeah.
So how does that happen? So then you have to tease it apart. Is the physician not taking her concerns seriously? Does she not feel empowered? So there might be there could be all kinds of factors, but how do you sort of tease them apart? And so for me, again, I don't know all the answers. Of course I don't. None of us do. But if we're thinking differently, then how do you extrapolate that conversation around maternal health to just a general doctor's visit? Let's say I'm a trans kid and I'm going to visit my pediatrician in a suburb or in a city, and they don't have any other kids who've identified as trans. And so are they asking the right questions for this child? Are they supporting this child?
And where do they access the information? Do we provide it for them? Right? Do we provide it for them? Because they don't, maybe it's not part of their training yet. Maybe they haven't gotten there. We don't want that doctor to feel bad about that. We want them to be aware enough to say, there's something I don't know. Let me figure it out. And if I can't figure it out today, let me schedule you for a follow-up virtually in 2 weeks, where in the meantime, my office and my staff and we're going to figure out what is it that we're supposed to do that is unique to you that we're not thinking about. So at least I'm culturally respectful, if not yet fully aware. And I feel like that, it goes back to what you were saying about bias. We all have bias, and what can we do when we walk in a room and see someone to think about it and say, hold on, is it possible that I am self-reflecting and have some bias? Oh, and we have people finally waking up and coming in, which is delightful. There's an audience back here, so if you hear noise, these are some people, the delightful people that we'll interview.
I was actually going to say, I love that because, as horrific and unimaginable as this pandemic has been, and I can't even imagine what it's been like to be a healthcare worker, but, there have been some innovations that have come out of this. And so who would have gone to a virtual healthcare visit before the pandemic? No one. It would have been, we would have thought, not personal, ineffective. Do I have to be on video? Do I have to do my hair? Like all this ridiculous stuff that we don't, clearly we don't care about anymore. And so what's cool to me is then how do we turn that into sort of real wins? And so one of the things that the state governments did is they relaxed some of the practicing restrictions during the pandemic, so you could practice across states. And so let's now pretend that I'm a mom. Hey, I'm a mom, and I have a kid with a chronic disease. Oh, I do. But instead of living in Boston, where I have arguably the best healthcare in the world, let's pretend I now live in northern Maine. And so my doctor probably hasn't experienced a child, perhaps, that has this condition, supported a parent. And so what do? There's probably a really hard time, and we know how hard it is, in particular with rare diseases, to get kids or people, grown-ups as well, diagnosed. So what if there's a better way for me to not just drag my child into a city where, the commuting might be, I might have to take off work, I might not have a car, they might have mobility issues. If I can just pop on a virtual call with someone at MGH in another state. And so there's all these things that I think created these moments of awakening over the past 2.5 years. And how do we capture those and keep the facility that we learned, as well as some of the regulations that have really benefited patients?
And some of what we talked about yesterday is a great conversation about, did COVID really change anything? And I think exactly what you're saying, Carla, was one of the things we recognized, which is we have all these new abilities. By the way, those people who were doing virtual visits before COVID, it was just me in my practice. I had a half day a week because I had adults with congenital heart disease who lived in, all over New England, and we needed them.
So as a reminder, Dr. Ami Bad built the telecardiology program at Mass General. So she was doing it 10 years ago before we had the COVID transformation. So she led the Mass General.
Yeah, and I had no friends. Nobody wanted to do it except me. I tried. But then COVID happened, and now people. But the interesting thing we're talking about is you need to figure out where those things need to continue to happen. And I think there's this conversation that happens, it was happening and now it's gone. And the answer is nothing is ever gone. It is a blended model now of getting that virtual care when you need, using your wearables and figuring out that data with your physician or your nurse when you need, being seen in person, right? And then using appropriately the ER in urgent care. We say that for Dr. Jill. Right?
No, I won't. If you feel like you need to come in, please come in. Do not delay.
But building a system where everybody can take part in the different mechanisms of care that we have available. And I think it's important. I'm going to go back to maternal health for a second, because we do. So just for those who don't know, maternal mortality is the highest in any developed country in the U.S.
And it's on the rise.
And it's been on the rise. And California is
I
actually
did not
one
know
of the
it's
first.
been on the rise.
It's been on the rise.
That's insane.
Yep.
Do you know why?
There are many, many reasons that we are starting to learn about why. One is the inequities. The second, and I will take responsibility, is actually cardiovascular disease and our lack of ability to recognize that having hypertension prior to pregnancy is a concern, that we need prenatal care, but then we also need intrapartum care, watching for things like preeclampsia.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then in the postpartum period, there's significant risk as well.
Yeah.
And so right now, when we look at it, there's in the US, I believe we still have from COVID the residual of coverage for postpartum months. However, one thing we really need to think about is we really want to make sure that that first year postpartum is covered for all women on whatever type of insurance. First of all, that they're on insurance, and the second, that they are covered during that first year, because you can still have cardiovascular complications. But the reason I bring all this up is to say data was really important. California was one of the first states to say, hey, we need a review committee. We need to talk about why women are dying, to answer your question. To be able to understand, because it may not be the same in California as in Louisiana, as in New York. And I think that's really important. And our audience appears to already have questions about this or commentary.
The audience already has questions. And I do want to just highlight for Dr. Budd that she got so into it that we are well into the show. So she has to bring other people
I am
on.
sorry. Yes. This is great. Like Carla woke up early and she was perfect.
Carla was amazing. No, so with the Convergence Forum, the beauty of the Convergence Forum is it brings together the best and the brightest across different verticals that don't always talk to each other. So the fact that you're giving us more, I think, of the pharma biotech perspective is so important, because you guys are so caring. You're doing cutting edge research. You're doing it from the heart. And I think physicians sometimes don't see that as much, and also our patients don't see that. So really important for you to share that, but specifically understanding the inequities, meaning what's affecting healthcare, how do we fix it? And you having the data and actually making meaningful change is incredible. So I think we should think about that, when we're thinking about the people in our lives.
Yeah, and one of the things some of us were talking about last night is about 50% of the participants at Convergence this year are women. And so the conversations I was having in the bar last night were with other women around our pipelines and what we're developing and how we're layering a women's health view on it.
Yeah.
And so again,
so I want to just pause there. So I think for some people who aren't used to clinical trials, aren't used to healthcare has been biased for so long because we just didn't have the perspective of what does this clinical trial look like for a woman? How do we enroll her? How does this drug affect her? So that's massive. So tell us why.
Yeah, well, and so now you've got me thinking of something else. So what we were talking about before we started talking to you all was how can we get physicians in rural communities more involved in the clinical trial process? Because it's a very empowering opportunity for you to sort of not just learn about drug discovery, but to see how new innovations could perhaps benefit your patients. And so we were talking about is, wow, wouldn't it be cool if med schools actually offer courses, if they don't already, on clinical trials? And how do they work? Because they're really complicated, or can be. There's a ton of regulation around it, which can be scary for people. And so we tend to see them in the big city centers, which is great if you live, again, or work in Boston. But if you're in a more rural area or a rural regional hospital or a community hospital in a city, how can we sort of start to bring you all involved and the hospitals involved? Because it's a huge venue or opportunity or gateway to therapy, right? If you're in a clinical trial, you're getting a very rigorous sort of physical plan. People are really starting to understand your disease, and you're having an opportunity for a therapy that doesn't exist that may help you. And so how do we get more rural physicians involved, and then how do we actually go further back into the med schools and really help? And so anyway, that's how we started this conversation. So if there's med students out there, take some time to go to the CDC and Google clinical trials and see what they look like and learn about them. because it's really cool and it's a great opportunity.
That's great. So for cardiovascular fellows, I'll just put a pitch out there. We do have a clinical trial program. It's a boot camp where we can teach you about clinical trials
and we meeting
American College of
Okay.
Cardiology. I'm sorry, American College of Cardiology. I'll put that on for 1 second. So women and underrepresented minorities, please do look at the American College of Cardiology too.
Wow. I did not know about that. That's incredible.
It's a wonderful program, and it's actually funded by our pharma colleagues who are interested in getting more people who are from diverse backgrounds, interested in clinical trials, to do the trials in the way that we then, are more innovative. So this was great. Shall we?
Yes.
Carla, we're going to switch you out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
And as we switch up, I'm just going to do a reminder, and you're seeing my face really front and center right here, because I'm messing with some of the tech things here. So as you're switching and bringing up someone else,
yeah, I'm looking for eye contact as to who wants to go next. Yes, okay, all right, there we go.
I am just going to do a little reminder that we
literally put this here. Can you get through? You good? Okay.
I'm going to do a little reminder that we are excited to have everyone joining us. We are live and recorded and interactive. So if you are watching, we'd love for you to share who you are, where you're watching from, what you're working on, and any questions that you might have for our guests. So please feel free to just post that in the comment section below, and we'll be sure to post it on the show. Who do we have now?
So we have Joan La Rivera next. And so we've known Joan you've known Joan longer than I have. I first met Joan, I want to say, right around the Convergence Forum last year, perhaps. Soon after that. And when we think about what we can do, so we're on a little train today this morning, just to put out there, of those people who are going in the scientific route through research, through being MDs, and then how they sometimes move into other areas, which is why we have you here, or those who started in a science family but really went down the business route and yet found themselves in love with biotech. And we've seen both of those this year, especially here at the Convergence Forum. And it's been great because it makes you realize that siloing of my training is this and therefore this is all I will do is probably not the way to do it. And in fact, saying this is my training, but I can now apply this in different areas by learning new skills is important. So maybe we'll start by having you introduce yourself to the audience, if that works, and tell them a little bit about your course and how you got to where they are, because where you are, I think they'll be interested.
Sure. Thanks so much, guys, for having me. I really appreciate it. Well, I guess to begin with, like both of you, I started out as a clinical physician. I practiced cardiac intensive care for many years in London at Great Ormond Street in the Royal Brompton Hospital, where I was chief of the cardiac ICU there and involved in many layers of healthcare, from the government, so systems wide across the country, to more local in running things within my hospital there. I've been for the last 10 years here in Boston. I practice at Boston Children's Hospital in cardiac intensive care.
That's insane.
So let's pause for 1 second.
Like we should pause for that.
I wanted to pause before Boston Children's. I'm glad she got it in. So when she says Royal Brompton, Great Ormond Street, like those of us who have trained in pediatrics, our eyes go big and we see stars. And I mean, talk about.
I had no idea. Really, that's what
yeah.
we're gonna.
You didn't even know that?
No, I had no idea. I don't know. I'm not pediatrics.
Oh my goodness! I mean, just unbelievable institution, and to have been the chief of the cardiac ICU there, I just want to put that out. That this is a really big deal, and the number of not only children's lives that they saved, but the way that they have changed the practice.
Really?
Of medicine and cardiology, and the way that we have, children who make it past age 18, and the way that my field exists, adults with congenital heart disease, that is because of this. So I'm just going to put this out there. All right. So you were going to say something too.
With cardiac ICU. That's.
Do you want me to? Can I move over because you're like your hands are in the picture.
Am.
Come on. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay. You were going to say something.
Oh yeah. No, I'm just really impressed with the cardiac ICU. It's a rough route, and it's rough. Like some people are like. I'm an ER doctor. People are like, hey, it's traumatic. I'm like, yeah, there's trauma. We're fast moving. People are, potentially dying when they roll in. Cardiac ICU is very, intense.
It is extremely intense. Lots of nights, lots of weekends, lots of holidays, but it's incredible work, and it's highly functional teamwork. And there's such a satisfaction of doing that, of advancing the field. and working with, I've been really blessed to work with so many talented, intelligent surgeons, cardiologists, intensivists, anesthetists. And there's nothing quite like handing someone their child back, right? And it's been a really rewarding profession, and really happy to have been able to be part of that, and also to be part of it at a leadership level as a woman. It's the UK gave me tremendous opportunities.
Really?
Yes, to be chief of a major center, to be on the board of the hospital, the pediatric hospital. It's an adult and pediatric hospital, Brompton. To be a trustee of the Royal College of Pediatrics, to be on committees with the Chief Medical Officer for England, who's basically the Surgeon General equivalent. I feel like I had some tremendous opportunity for career advancement there as a woman, and seeing on International Women's Day what the Brompton put out, I was really honored because they'd come so far in advancing women's careers. And that was a tremendous opportunity.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And then you started to switch gears later in life a little bit in terms of how you were going to use your knowledge base and help people.
I think in two ways I have started to switch gears. I think in the UK I had the opportunity to build out some innovative business lines and to be entrepreneurial within the hospital system. And I also have built an NGO called Virtue Foundation over the last 20 years. It was 9/11 that spurred us to create it. Some colleagues of mine in New York and myself in London. And we launched it. We had seed funding from the Rockefeller Foundation and got it off the ground on the 1-year anniversary of 9/11. And since that time, we've done a tremendous amount of work in the global health space. And this thought of, change begins within each of us, one person at a time, one act at a time. And how do we create a platform to galvanize using our skill sets to advance things? So I think that was always moving in a certain direction. That was like a second career that was a real passion and love. I really wanted to be able to make that impact with my colleagues. And I think I was talking to you about, we've built out this global health philanthropy map, which has been a very important part of what I've been doing, I think, with my time.
That's phenomenal. And you're leaving the country soon. Remind us where you're headed next.
I am. I'm headed to Mongolia. It's our first trip in 3 years. It was May 2019. We've worked there for almost 15 years now.
That's amazing.
To be able to go back and work, I can't remember how many of us there are. I think there's 20, 25. It's about half the size of our normal trips. I think the last one was 52 clinicians and allied health. So I'm really looking forward to being back on the ground again and working with colleagues there.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So I want to just go back to the NGO for a little bit, because what you built is impressive. And I, as a physician, just didn't understand what it is, the importance of it, and especially the importance now when we're trying to recover from COVID.
I think it's critical. Many of us, if there's doctors and healthcare folks on the show today, many of us have done work overseas. I mean, it's really quite popular, I think, for physicians. It gets you back to the purity of being a doctor again. And I think that's a real love. But you also see there's so much inefficiency that you arrive somewhere. I don't know if either of you have done, medical or surgical trips overseas, but I've been to many countries, to Cambodia, to Ghana, to Mongolia, many places. And you spend a lot of time on the ground figuring it out. And my colleague, Dr. Ebi Elahi, he's in New York at Mount Sinai, he came up with this idea. He's like, we have big data, we have cloud computing, we have AI. We have such efficiency in our financial markets. Why are we so inefficient here? Right? And it's like this lemon market. There's this asymmetry of information. Folks who want to help and have the clinical know-how or access to resource to be able to help want to do that, but there's frictions. Where do I go? How safe is it? What do I need? Will there be what I need for equipment? What else do I need to bring? Otherwise I can't do this surgery, or I can't do this. Who can I train there who can raise the skill set and be able to deliver this sort of procedures and care when I leave? the folks on the ground who most need your help, how do they make themselves known?
Yeah.
So when you're on the ground, you see there's a lot of action that congregates in capital cities.
Okay.
And the folks who maybe most need it, they're not there.
Yeah.
They're more remote, and they don't know how to make themselves known to those that are there to provide care. So that sort of brought about our what we call Virtue Foundation's Actionable Data Initiative. So create data that's actionable,
Yeah.
that reduces these frictions and creates a marketplace for global health philanthropy, and provides insights on what's really happening on the ground and where resource, whether that's building a new healthcare or surgical facility, or whether that's directing cancer care, or bringing an ophthalmology team in to help do cataracts and train local providers in cataracts. You can go on and on with examples. We'll be more efficient using this marketplace.
It's fantastic. You know, this came up a lot during COVID originally,
Yes.
recently during Ukraine, right? Which is how do we know where the help is needed? How do I know that what I'm doing is getting to the people, and what you're doing has actually helped map out, here's where the need is, here's where we've been successful, here's areas where if you're starting something new, you could maybe focus because we see a little gap here where there's nobody in that area. So maybe you could concentrate there. So
Absolutely.
so very important to coordinate that.
So the examples you gave, we have mapped the Ukraine, right? So the Ukraine is mapped. We've mapped Ghana, and during COVID, because that's a country we have worked in quite considerably, by April of 2020, we had the data, we could look at it. We were able to get oxygen concentrators, oxygen cylinders, non-invasive ventilators, because that's a much easier mode of ventilation in those remote areas.
That's incredible.
Hand washing stations, masks, etc., distributed across the right healthcare centers. And then we could share protocols.
That's great.
They have steroids, they have heparin, you know, like the basic things. So I would be in my ICU in Boston on WhatsApp with there aren't many physicians in that area, but with them rolling this out.
Yeah.
So by April of 2020, we had everything in place in
Amazing.
northern Ghana.
Amazing.
And that was being able to have access to the data and the information.
Yeah.
And then establishing relationships with folks on the ground to be able to implement without even being there.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the power of, I think, where we are going. And the vfmatch.org platform is out there if anybody wants to
say it again so that they can hear it once more.
It's VF. V is in Victor, F is in Frank, match, like make a match, .org.
Okay.
So that's where we find the website that has all of these resources mapped or needs mapped out. And then as you're thinking about growing it, especially as we're recovering from COVID and trying to figure out, hey, how do we respond to the next pandemic better, more collaboratively across the world, where can people go to donate or work with you? So virtuefoundation.org.
Virtuefoundation.org. Okay.
You can please provide a resource, whether that's in time or in capital. We have opportunities for folks to volunteer. We are definitely looking for some signature sponsors of the vfmatch.org platform. I think that when you get in that platform, you can look at healthcare NGOs and healthcare facilities based by specialty. Right. So if you want to search it by cardiology, you want to search it by genetics and rare diseases, you want to search it by cancer, general surgery, you can do that and see who is doing that work, where. And then we have volunteer opportunities. So NGOs can list their opportunities and you can match yourself against them. And I think for where it's going, it's being able to add other layers of data. So we've added nightlight data, Twitter data. We can look at Google Images in terms of building footprint and height. And you can extrapolate from that what sort of capacity is there. And I think it's this layers of data together give you insights of what's really happening on the ground. And then add in conflict data from Reuters to be able to see why you may not go one area versus another, or why there's a need and a government should maybe build a healthcare facility there, but right now would not be the time to do so.
Yeah.
So it's giving you a better picture of what's happening on the ground and reducing frictions. And I think that's really important for our future as
Absolutely.
we talk about
Absolutely.
equality in healthcare. And I think for the next COVID, we want to know that sort of information. And we're so interconnected now in this world. It's very important to care about what's happening.
Absolutely.
4,000 miles away. You know?
Yeah. Well, this is just amazing. You know,
It
so I will. I'm going to give a quick.
Okay.
No, I'm going to soapbox it
And
for
then-
just
okay,
1
you're gonna
second,
soapbox,
and then we're going to bring more people on.
More
Yes.
people and more
So-
comments from our audience.
Perfect. So
Watching
my
virtually.
quick soapbox is along the way there has been a habit in the physician industry of when people go to biotech, go to do pharma, go to do other things, referring to things as the dark side. And I'm going to put a real statement out, like, could we not do that? Because there are so many people we saw from Carla earlier, right? Thinking about Merck and maternal health, thinking about the work she's doing in diversity. Or thinking about how Joan is out there and really making a difference and helping the NGOs and everything else that she's doing, while also selecting companies to invest in. We didn't even get to that part of what she does, but so there is so much good that can come out of thinking about being in biotech and what we're doing. We're going to next actually talk about climate and how the biotech industry.
We're talking about climate.
We're going to talk about climate.
Switching over to climate
and how the biotech industry do that.
So big thank you to Joan for joining us today.
Perfect. And then Joan, will you give them one more thing? I know you gave them a lot of things. Will you tell them about the iSelect Fund as well, if you don't mind, real quick, and just tell them where they can find it?
Absolutely.
And in the meantime, Doug is coming on up.
Absolutely. So So the other arm of my career, as you asked me, and sort of what else I'm doing, when I moved here from the UK, I did an MBA at MIT because I wanted to be able to impact change at scale, both at the foundation and across healthcare. And I found it a tremendously interesting and innovative fund called iSelect Fund. The home office is based out of St. Louis and invest within healthcare and agriculture.
Oh, lovely.
Wow.
Lovely. So iSelect Fund. So that's another place people can look to find you and see what you do.
iSelect Fund.
Okay. Excellent.
Please look it up. I think that this is going to be an incredibly important venture capital fund because it invests from seed all the way through to exit in healthcare and agriculture.
Amazing.
And we have tremendous issues with 1.7 trillion spent in food, 1.9 trillion spent in healthcare, and 88% of us with not in a state of metabolic health.
Yeah.
And invest
Amazing.
across that.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for everything that you do.
Yes.
Absolutely
Yes.
amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
It's so
Thank you.
great to have you here.
Thank you for joining us, Joan. Very exciting. And we are moving over to the next speaker.
Do you want to come with
And-
him? I feel like you should. We're going to bring Lori Halloran up at the same time.
Yes.
Come
And
on, both of you together.
we're gonna move them
I'm
up, and
going to
I'm
relinquish my
move out
seat
of the
here for a
field.
second.
And
Here we go. Come on up. Sorry, I think we're running a little short on time, so we're gonna.
You're making my
combo
show
deal
so
it.
chaotic today.
And Doug, do you want to come
No,
around the back?
I'm going to
here
move in
and
just a minute.
grab
I want to say
seat?
thank you
Or
for
that
everyone
seat
who's
if you want.
watching.
Sorry,
I
we're
want
a
to
little tight
say
in here.
thank you to Paige McKee. Paige McKee is from Kentucky, and she's working on a large health equity project. She's a social entrepreneur. She says, thank you for your great sessions, and you ladies rock. So Paige, thank you so much for joining our show. And also just continue the important work that you're doing in health equity. Social entrepreneurs are important, and the wave and what we need to do. So I am now going to move out of the screen, and Dr. Butt is going to
Okay, you're going to keep doing the
introduce.
task. Okay.
Yes, in case the show goes down.
Okay. All right. So we have McDougall and Halloran here with us today. Very excited. There's a lot of things that we can talk about with Doug and Lori, but I think one of the things that we should probably focus on is yesterday there was a great session talking about climate and what our responsibility is and what our responsibility could be as being biotech. And I think it's an important area that we can address. And then we can get a little bit more broad about Convergence Forum because these two have been here since I want to say perhaps the beginning, and how things have changed. So I will let each of you maybe introduce yourselves a little bit and let people know how you got to here, and then we can chime in if that sounds good.
Sure. So I'm Doug McDougall. I run a firm called McDougall Advisors. I've been in the biotech industry since 1988, and I've really fallen in love with the industry itself. And my firm actually helps companies on the life science side, mostly therapeutics and medical device and diagnostic companies, tell their story to investors, to partners, to the world, and get their the great stuff that they're doing out to these people, including clinicians and patients as well. So we do public relations, investor relations.
That's great. And Lori, will you do the same and tell people about you, and then
Sure.
they'll see why I wanted you guys both here together.
Well, and Doug actually recommended that I come to the conference the first time and that it has made a huge difference in my business. I needed to meet more CEOs, and I found the place to do that. We work with companies that need to figure out how they're going to develop their products. So there's a huge talent shortage, and we have people who have 20 plus years of experience, help them figure out how to prioritize their portfolio, and then how to quantify what it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, and then we actually do that work. So we get them from 2 guys in a molecule
Mm-hmm.
or 2 women in a molecule up to ready for inspection by FDA.
That's fantastic.
I like to say 2 rats and a PhD.
Oh, good.
There we go. That's perfect. Although I was going to say, if we ever do a proper sitcom, Jen, I think we could call ourselves 2 Women in a Molecule. I feel like that might be this could be our future.
You're moving to creativity and branding. Okay.
Maybe we don't want me in that space. So last night at dinner, both of you had a great passion for thinking about climate and climate change and our responsibility in the biotech industry. And I was just hoping that our audience could just hear a little bit about your thoughts about that conversation yesterday, and just open their minds to the idea that we can all be talking about it.
It was really Doug that really started it. And I said that we needed to amplify it. So how could we do that?
So there was this panel that actually not a lot of people showed up at here at Convergence that was really, really interesting, and I love to learn new things, and this is a new area for me, the climate change part of it. But given what the biotech industry did for vaccines and for COVID, and listening to these companies talk that have ideas to help the climate, whether it's through agriculture or through creating energy through algae or whatever, really opened up my mind to the idea that biotech could maybe come in and be the savior in the climate issue. The problem that I saw with the panel was they're very dispersed companies that were solving problems that could be very valuable to this, but the industry really could actually come together and be a major contributor. And also what I learned at there is we know that you can't make it a capitalist thing. It's not that the investors are going to make a lot of money doing this. So you have to have some kind of a central organization or some kind of from my PR perspective, a call to action for these companies to all get together and to work together and attract capital from the government, from maybe high net worth individuals or other people that really do care about the environment, because it's there. The answers are there in this industry. We're not going to solve all the problems, but we can make huge impact into some of the problems. And that is what the epiphany was that I got out of that panel is there's this opportunity for this industry to rally around this and attract the capital that's needed to make it happen. Because if you create, for example, this one company that Oliver Fetzer was talking about that can create oil out of algae, so you don't have to pull it out of the ground and burn it.
So say that again. We can create oil out of algae. There's a company that's able to do that.
And but this requires huge amounts, hundreds and hundreds of millions of capital to scale up to build this. So who's going to pay for that? Right. But there's, we've got the problems with the methane from cows and stuff that biotech can deal with and things like that. So there's a huge opportunity, but I think there needs to be a bandwagon that people get around, and it's not there yet. And that was the epiphany I had.
That's right. So the concept behind this, just to make sure, because I'm sorry, I did not attend that session, and I'm regretting it, but I'm glad you're here because we can talk about it. Is that there are biotech companies that can, first of all, solve some of our energy issues, think about our environment, make us more environmentally sound. So that's kind of one avenue of just supporting those types of companies.
Yep.
The second is, I don't know that we have VCs out there that are really that focused on the biotech and climate. But iSelect Fund that we just heard about might be one where we talk about agriculture and healthcare.
Yep.
And so I think getting more of those people at the table and others at the table who want to do that. I love the idea of raising capital from the government. I always smile a little bit when we say that, and yet, I think that's a globally sound idea. And then, do we think about larger biotech and carbon footprint in that same? Should that be at the same table then, in thinking about decreasing what we are doing in terms of kind of large companies, large pharma? We have some of the biggest companies out there, and
No, I haven't thought that far, but I think
Just
this is just an epiphany that came to me yesterday afternoon.
I love it. That's great.
But no, I think it could be very valuable of the industry reducing their footprint as well. But I think there's this massive problem coming to us, and we need to do something, and unfortunately it's not like the pandemic where it just comes to us and we have this big problem. It's like the frog in the boiling water, and we just don't, we see it coming, but we're not going to jump out of the water because it's not, and make those actions. So I think there just needs to be that opportunity.
And I think it's going to steadily jump out of the water at our kids and our grandkids, and that's just horrible that that's what we're doing to them, right? So I think
what inspired me, that what Doug was saying yesterday, is we know how to amass interest and amass money, and if there's passion for it, then somebody has to start. All these little individual companies, they don't necessarily think big.
Right.
So if you think bigger, and you start to create some energy around assembling and doing the right thing, then that was what inspired me.
That's fantastic.
And it could be a whole industry in itself that brings not just biotech, but also tech together and working and solving some of these problems. So it's not just biotech.
But I love the concept too, is that it's both our responsibility, but that we are good. We know how to generate interest and money. We've figured that out for the right things.
Right.
But this is in fact perhaps the most right thing for us to focus on next.
I think so. I think so. And getting and I think the mission itself could attract the capital. The government spent over $1 trillion they threw out in this first bill with COVID. And if somebody ever realizes that, but it's not just the government money. I'm sure people that have a lot of money would be very passionate about feeling they're doing something. Even some of the larger corporations like Exxon and the oil companies want to feel that they're actually doing something without hurting their business. So there could be a huge amount of opportunity here to build something to kind of pull together all of the technologies out there to solve this problem.
Oh, I love this. I'm so glad you brought this up. This is so important for the audience to hear.
I'm a connector.
That's why we love it. That's why we're here at the Convergence Forum. So I'm trying to keep an eye on the time because I see Jen staring at me, and I think we only have a couple minutes. Let's talk
we only have a couple of minutes, and did we want to bring Stephanie up to finish with?
Yes, we should do that too. I want one other thing though. I want other epiphanies. Let's give them the one-liners of the things that they should be thinking about, the audience, from Convergence Forum from yesterday. Things that you picked up on and you said, this was good, keep an eye out for that, or that was good. I would love your insights.
Telemedicine.
Okay.
Telemedicine is, and that was the panel I was sitting in when the climate change was going on. It's also very fragmented. Medical records, electronic medical records are not conducive to life science companies extracting data, and no one really is interested in the patient's information beyond what could be made more efficient about some type of bridge between the medical records and all the data we have to collect. And that to me was huge because everybody was in agreement.
Yeah.
That we waste a huge amount of money on the back end after the patients have been given the experimental medication, collecting the information, verifying it, auditing it. There's just such a huge opportunity there.
And that's all money that can go into better drug development
Exactly.
and reaching out into more, disparate communities
Yeah.
and the underserved. And there's a lot of places that money could go that's better than saying
Absolutely.
we're going to redo the data, even though the data is right there because we don't have access,
Well,
because we
COVID-
don't have standards.
COVID showed us that we can do remote visits. I had several remote doctor's visits. It was fantastic. I didn't have to pay for parking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the industry has embraced that, and there's a huge initiative on, choose your own journey in clinical trials, which will help patients who are now patients know
Sure.
that
Mhm.
clinical trials exist.
Yeah.
But we have to get better at collecting the data.
Yeah.
And that's a huge initiative that we should be
So
embarking
important.
on.
It's incredibly important.
Yeah.
Good.
That's great.
Any other insights from you, Doug, that you
The
picked up on?
great thing
Yeah.
about this conference is the discussions that happen also offline.
Especially in the evening.
Oh God, after a couple drinks. But at lunch yesterday, we brought up the subject in our table. Nobody knew anybody. What's this conference going to be talking about in 2032? And it was really kind of interesting that we have those types of discussions as groups. Because it's not just about biotech, it's just about healthcare. It's about all the things that are around us that are important. And actually the discussion all came that this industry needs to start having a voice. It's shown that it can do things now and save a pandemic. And it needs a voice out there. So public policy, I think, is going to be a very important part of what this industry needs to be doing out there in the next 5 to 10 years. And that was, really getting to letting people understand of what this industry can do and what it should do and how things need to change to make better and more efficient healthcare systems.
And to add on to that, I was listening when you were talking about not being the dark side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was a nurse, and as soon as I started in a clinical trial, which was years ago, about the same time as Doug started, in an HIV trial, I was like, oh, wow, this could really make a difference
Yeah.
for patients
Mhm. Yeah.
rather than just the same old thing day in and
Yeah.
day out. And that it totally ignited my passion.
Yeah.
So the industry isn't the dark side.
Yeah.
The industry is where change can happen,
Mhm.
big change in healthcare.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that there was an alliance of all the pharmaceutical companies that got together to try and solve HIV that was put together.
That's
And
great.
so
That's great.
they came to the
Yeah.
Yep. And I think we're seeing that with individual companies. We're seeing that with the global efforts.
Mhm.
And now I love this concept, though. We really need to use our voice. And if I'm correct, the Convergence Forum today has some great lineups, but the very last talk where we will all come together is actually on policy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a place where we can once again, perhaps even in the room, make that point. If you're following, it's hashtag CVForum22. So I'm sure there will be a lot of Twitter chat about policy and biotech, but not just biotech, MedTech, digital health, all of us together, thinking about how we can stand up and have our voice heard for the sake of not only healthcare, but yesterday we had a great discussion. How about just health? Right? How about just being healthy and how can we do that? And so a lot more coming. Are there some comments to close us out there, Jen? I know I see we're at time.
We are at time, so I think we just thank our audience and thank our panelists.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. And thanks to the panelists before. It's been great to be here at the Convergence Forum. And again, hashtag CVForum22 to follow the conversation online. And we look forward to seeing you otherwise at our regularly scheduled show. Thank so much for
You're
being here
welcome.
with us.
Thank you.
For coming.
Thank you.
Thanks to
you
our audience.
audience.